Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. A pesky penguin made the following request on Twitter. Can you please cover why Placer Sheriff didn't find Kylie even though they did have the necessary equipment and training? Thank you. Thanks for your question. I did actually cover this briefly in the Reality Shifts live stream with Terry Dean. If you remember, Terry showed us this Caltopo app screen grab. By the way, Caltopo creates mapping software for mobile phones for rural or backcountry use, such as search and recreation. To their credit, at least 3 searches moved right over the target area, meaning at least the search did reach the right area. The red line appears to literally pass over the exact spot where the silver Honda SUV was later located. I think there are 4 dimensions to why law enforcement failed to locate the vehicle despite having massive resources at their disposal. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment. If you're enjoying this coverage, you like what this channel stands for, you are welcome to hit the thanks icon. And let's get started. Number 1, amateur searches. I think the Caltopo app is both a blessing and a curse in a search operation like this. It's a blessing because it prevents the wasting of resources where a particular area is searched repeatedly and unknowingly rather than having those resources distributed or delegated elsewhere. I do think if in your mind you're searching for a vehicle that has accidentally crashed, and I believe that is what they were looking for and what they should have been looking for, it's counterintuitive to imagine it would hide itself. The fact that the vehicle also disappeared was both the greatest clue and greatest mystery. Was the vehicle in a ravine or hidden in plain sight at Truckee Teho Airport? Was the vehicle underwater or hidden in the garage of a vacation home? But the fact is that those who participated in the search for the most part were amateurs, and they were looking for something that was obviously there, not something that was hidden. In a weird way, Kylie's vehicle was both. It was in an obvious place, but also hidden. I also assumed wrongly, as it turned out, that if Kylie had driven into the dam, the vehicle would be close to the shore and probably visible from the shore, and I think many others made that same error. The Caltopo app was a curse because for those who had glossed over the area in a quick, casual fashion, it meant others who might search more thoroughly, like our own Terry Dean, simply wouldn't search in that area because it had supposedly already been covered. A second reason why law enforcement failed was bad luck. I think it was bad luck that the vehicle had overturned so that its dark chassis faced the surface of the reservoir rather than the reflective silver surface. That's an aspect that also helped hide the vehicle, and one I think none of us considered. Incidentally, the same question came up, but perhaps far more severely, in the Nora Corrin case, where a 15-year-old French-Irish girl disappeared in the Malaysian jungle. The army, the police, dogs, helicopters, ground-penetrating radar, infrared, all of these were used, and they couldn't locate her, when in reality she was barely a mile away from the lodge where she'd gone missing. So it does happen, it can happen. Ironically, I think the reason they failed to locate Nora was the reason authorities failed to locate Kylie's vehicle. That brings us to number 3, pressure from social media. As a result of public pressure and pressure from the media, but also pressure from social media, the search was rushed. In retrospect, I think it's clear that had the search been slower, more meticulous, more careful, more cautious, and if it had started systematically from the ping point, Kylie's vehicle could have and should have been found on day 1 rather than day 16. Does that make sense? And now if you think about where were they searching when they should have been searching in the reservoir and in the campground? What were they doing at the time that AWP arrived there? That's the 4th point. Now, if you disagree that social media caused law enforcement to rush and make mistakes, consider what law enforcement were doing when Adventures with Purpose came onto the scene. It's not a secret. Just follow the timeline of the media narrative. On August 16, after about 10 days of fruitless searching, and 5 or 6 days before AWP arrived on the scene, law enforcement they made the decision to limit or curtail their search. And what did they do then? Well, they basically deployed resources into, let's call it, different investigative areas. Well, what were those areas? Well, we know because 4 days later they said that they were doing a sweep of sex offenders. So they were looking for an abductor, weren't they? Where did that psychology come from? At the time, I certainly thought it was justified. It was also around this time that the Uber couple's vehicle was found. And so it seemed, since far more resources were devoted to finding Kylie, if they weren't finding a vehicle in the campground, well, surely it was because it wasn't there. At the time, I thought, well, if you haven't found anything after 10 days, maybe you need to start searching somewhere else. And so I sent our own investigator up to Lost Trail Lodge to look at the topography and search the roads in the last couple of miles of what ought to have been Kylie's drive home. And we know that was quite a treacherous drive as well. But I also instructed Terry to walk from the party site at the sanctuary down to the nearest stretch of water, measure the distance, time the walk, and record it. I think an error we made was that we didn't immediately draw the distinction between where the party was held and the campground. In hindsight, before you decide to cross off a particular area, ask, have you made absolutely certain there's nothing there? In other words, it's a question of attention to detail. In defense of Placer County Sheriff's gaffe here, the Malaysian Army made exactly the same mistake. So did those searching for Kaylee Anthony. Bear in mind, she was found just a quarter mile from home. And in my view, the Madeleine McCann case as well. In that case, the search was going international in hours, only for there to be cadaver alerts, not just in the original country, in the original town, in the original hotel, but the original apartment. In the John Benet Ramsey case, all they had to do was search the house. John Benet was actually in a wine cellar in the basement all along. Well, they searched the house. They just didn't search it very thoroughly. And when they thought they'd excluded John Benet from being in the home, they started taking cues from the Ramseys and looking beyond the home. So if you want a search to fail, rush. If you want a search to fail, take your cues from outside influence. So what was law enforcement doing when AWP came onto the scene? They were searching for the same perpetrator social media had homed in on, an abductor, a trafficker, a suspicious old guy at the party, or an evil senior or mean girls. And so we know by August 20, there were headlines like, Search for missing California teen leads to arrest of sex offender, and California sex offender arrested on unrelated charge as a result of search for missing girl. Well, that was exactly right. It was unrelated. It was at this point that I felt law enforcement were going off track. They shouldn't have been looking for an abductor. They should still have been trying to find the vehicle in an innocent type scenario. And I'm not saying this in hindsight. I was saying this while it was taking place. Anyway, it was at this point that AWP came onto the scene. And that brings up the question, why did Adventures with Purpose succeed where law enforcement failed? I think if social media sent law enforcement in the wrong direction, I think some social media did help in the search for Kylie Rodney. Social media reached out to AWP, and AWP, who are essentially freelance YouTubers, responded. I also think putting up drone footage and some of the online coverage would have educated AWP quite quickly on what they were up against before they even reached the area. So the other reason why AWP succeeded where law enforcement failed was because of crime scene tape. Did you know the area where Kylie's vehicle was found was one of the few areas in the campground designated with crime scene tape? As I understand it, there were vehicle tracks going into the water, and these had been recorded and noted, and so quite naturally, AWP started their search of Prosser Lake there. This is why it took them only 35 minutes to locate the vehicle. 35 minutes may seem like a short time, but if you think about it, if they started searching right there, it still took them more than half an hour to locate what was ultimately obviously there all along. I do think a major reason why AWP succeeded was that they were using better equipment. A lot of what was needed here was advanced underwater imaging. So specialized equipment was ultimately going to be the tool required to have a breakthrough, and that's what we saw. Although I was disappointed with law enforcement, they provided a lot of useful intel to AWP, and it turned out to be very useful. Also, AWP had the nous to start searching at the most logical and sensible spot. Law enforcement dismissed their efforts, saying effectively, hey, you're wasting your time, we've already searched there. But that's the difference between searching and finding. Curiosity, the scout mindset, saying, hey, maybe we don't know. Maybe there's more to this. And that brings me to our poll posted a few hours ago. I asked you guys, what happened to KIELY? Was it an accident? Was it foul play? Or was it the only way we know is by getting the autopsy results? I don't think the only way we can know what happened to KIELY is by getting the autopsy results. I don't think the only way we can know is we've got to wait until somebody tells us what happened. It's also the reason I haven't reported on KIELY's remains being positively identified as KIELY officially, as news. If you didn't already know that, I think you're stuck in kindergarten level true crime. So if you have to wait days or weeks for an official report, then you're definitely not thinking like a true crime rocket scientist. Not that this is rocket science. That article I cited from SF Gate expresses the plain and obvious truth plainly and obviously. She writes, quote, it's long been evident that the most likely scenario was that a 16-year-old got in her car, possibly intoxicated, and made a mistake that killed her. That was the most likely scenario before KIELY's vehicle was found. But now it's a fait accompli. Now it's obvious. You may think advising patience and not rushing to judgment on the one hand, but then confirming KIELY's identity and establishing with certainty that she died, on the other in an accident is a contradiction. It's not. It's logic. It's concerning that some people clearly can't think logically, but is it any surprise when there are so many voices, so much noise, so much rabble, so much rattle and hum in the background trying to gaslight your reality, that now you can't actually think rationally. You can't actually think logically when the end result is presented to you. Now you need a report. Advising patients with limited information and being able to see something that's self-evidently there with more information was the difference between law enforcement and AWP. It's also the difference between one being able to decipher the truth and another knowing when it's become manifest. It was an accident. No foul play, no red flags besides the obvious don't drink and drive. So I'm not going to take it further than that. I do want to thank those who have been supporting me through this time. There are definitely people who have taken some pot shots at me for taking my position. I just want to thank those in my community and some new folks here who have been supportive of certainly my approach. Thanks a lot to you guys. I am still working on the number 4 clue we all missed, so look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.